All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I may be speaking kind of quietly right now because it's fairly early in the morning still, and some of my family is still asleep. I don't want to disturb them by being too obnoxious. Um, Today is the 14th of June. As you can see, I have Donald Trump's chart up on the screen because it's Donald Trump's birthday. And I was considering doing a video for Mars Uranus, but I figured it would make a sense to do this in the context of Trump's natal chart because, for one thing, obviously it's been pretty hectic recently in the United States. Um, all the protests in California, which seem to be escalated on purpose in the sense of calling in the National Guard, of calling in the Marines, of making it into a big spectacle. And of course, simultaneously, at the same time, Donald Trump is throwing a massive military parade for his birthday, which could be seen as a big spectacle or a show of military power and all this kind of stuff. And it's a very strange time recently. Obviously, there's also some stressful things going on with the conflict around Israel and the Middle East. That tensions flaring up with a missile exchange with Iran and stuff, and those all I feel go very well with this Mars Uranus square. Um, and one of the reasons why I'm out of all the activity I could be doing online, I'm choosing to focus on doing astrology is because, first of all, to me, it just makes sense and it just obviously works. And I think that if you look at this dynamic, it's is a clear example of how the current events are shaped by the astrology, right? Um, Now, the bad news about this, first of all, I'm just going to be doing showing these transits and Trump's natal chart. I'm not going to bother doing a solar return chart for Trump right now. But the thing is that the problem is that this birthday, this sort of moment is going to like set the tone for the next year for Trump, unfortunately. And it's in astrology, these are pretty hectic transits for Trump's natal chart because he has natally he's got Mars on the ascendant, right? The ascendant is supposedly designates, if you're thinking about like, okay, this, if the seventh house is the house of enemies or the house of the other, the partner, the first house is the house of the self. So any planets around the ascendant is going to tell you about the character of that person, right? As opposed to something like their family or their job or their home or their environment. This is like what Trump himself is like, and Mars on the ascendant casts Trump as being aggressive, being a fighter, being kind of a bull, being a bully, even, right? And the thing, so it makes sense that this sort of we've been experiencing a kind of peak of intensity around Donald Trump and this sort of Mars warlike aggressive tendency, right? And at the same time, he's got the midheaven. The midheaven stands more for your public image and what you're doing for a career and stuff like that, or what your career path or what your reputation is like. And he's been having Uranus transiting the midheaven. And so right now, as I record this video, there's a perfect square between Uranus at 28 degrees Taurus and Mars at 28 degrees Leo. And that is hitting the angles in Trump's chart, making it particularly a sensitive moment for Donald Trump, and also being a Mars return, emphasizing the Mars and Leo, right? Now, a number of other things have been going on. Um, I think it's worth pointing out that my last video I made was about the full moon in Sagittarius and the if you look at Donald Trump's natal chart, he has a full moon in Sagittarius in his chart here. And one of the things that I noticed was that I'm a Canadian, right? So I have the luxury of being able to watch all this unfold with a sense of a certain degree of distance and separation. Uh, so I can be kind of watching without the events transpiring really taking place in my local neighborhood, my local environment. But in the last video I made, I did mention something about the full moon in Sagittarius and the dynamic between the ruler of Sagittarius, Jupiter, going into Cancer, hitting that square to Saturn and Neptune and Aries. And I was talking about Neptune having to do with the archetype of the mass, right? Which shows up either in Catholic mass or mass media or gathering together as a mob or even like maybe a gang or something, right? Or that the full moon, and I was thinking about the full moon in Sagittarius. People often compare the Sagittarius archetype to like a rowdy biker gang of people who are kind of like, you know, reckless, free-spirited individuals, but nonetheless grouped together as an organization or something. And then after making that video, I had no idea this was going on, but that Hell's Angels are all gathering in kind of near my local area for a big funeral or something. And so it's kind of like, even though the what's going on in the States is that like there's some sort of like there's something about the Mars Uranus square and the recent full moon in Sagittarius that where I live it's manifested in a big Hell's Angels memorial service, right? And then, you know, compared to that, you've got the National Guard and ICE and all that kind of stuff, all, you know, and this big, or compared with groups of protesters organizing together, right? Big mobs or gangs or groups of people gathering together, and then the pretense of like law and order over the unruly masses. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's like in separate places. And then also we had in the news, I mean, I don't support or condone this, obviously, but I politically, you know, this is why I'm basically against populism and, you know, xenophobic anti-immigrant stuff. So in Ireland there was recent riots setting houses on fire over I don't know, it sounds like somebody was sexually assaulted and the angry mob came out with the torches and pitchforks, more or less. So there's all sorts of hectic things going on in this post full moon with the Mars Uranus square, with the Saturn Neptune conjunction, all that. It's pretty heavy, right? But if there's some sort of other things worth pointing out here, which may be more optimistic, that at least we have Jupiter in Cancer now. And one of the things that's interesting about this, if you look at it with Trump's natal chart, is that Jupiter here is it's in the 12th whole sign house. So previously Jupiter was in Gemini during the time of Trump's election win, and I kind of felt like that influence may have assisted Trump in his win. But now that Jupiter has out of where Trump's sun is and into his 12th house, Jupiter is going to be transiting Trump's Mercury, Trump's Saturn, Trump's Venus. And the thing about all this is that it's in the house of self-undoing, right? 12th house is the rules for, with the 11th house is things that help you, your allies, your social network, or whatever. You go and you make strategic, alliances or something. That always has to do with like the 11th house. 12th house has to do with things, mistakes, things going out of control, things where your own actions lead to your demise. And there are certain indicators here of like Saturn conjunct Venus, which the whole threat of the Epstein Association may be perhaps come to light with Jupiter there. There could even, I may forecast even some sort of legal thing coming up around, um, could be that Stormy Daniels kind of stuff. Could be Trump's, if there's any sort of indiscretions, could come to light. Um, that's just one thing. Um, and I was also thinking that if we think about where we're headed later this year, one of the things to look out for is we're going to have Uranus ingress into Gemini, and then we're going to have, eventually Trump's going to have a Uranus return, but that won't be for a while. So I was just thinking that if we just advance forward, what you see is that well, first of all, if we eventually Mars is going to be going into Virgo in just a few days after Trump's birthday. And I'm suspecting that once Mars is in Virgo, the whole things might cool down because, especially with Donald Trump. I mean, maybe there might be other issues going on, but I think on the American politics and the Donald Trump sign, a few days after his birthday, things might start to cool down because if you look at he doesn't have anything in Virgo. But then if you think about his allies such as Elon Musk and JD Vance, those guys both have moon in Virgo, so you may see less action from Trump, more action with JD Vance or Elon Musk, or even as a Canadian, Mark Carney has this Virgo stellium. So the attention might shift more to Mark Carney or something like that, right? That's one thing. So then as we keep going, I was thinking more about eventually we're going to get Uranus into Gemini here. In July the 7th, less than a month from now, Uranus is going to ingress into Gemini. This is going to be particularly interesting because this sets up the trine to Pluto and this kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of overly simplified it to compare it to like the age of Aquarius or something, but we're entering into an age of grand conjunctions and air signs, and there's going to be this general shift to more air, right? And with Uranus and Taurus, I think there's the emphasis on these wars, which are around actual physical territory, and not to mention fixed star Algol, one of the gnarliest fixed stars in the zodiac. Uranus has been hanging out in that vicinity, and I think there's something about all the real dramatic stuff going on right now that personally, I don't know if I don't want to get people's hopes up by getting too optimistic here, but I suspect that once Uranus is in Gemini, it's a good sign for things easing down around territorial geopolitical conflicts, but it'll be shift more into issues around information technology, communications, social media networks, news, factual journalism and reporting. I think that's going to be more of an issue than the outright territorial disputes. And I think that there's a good indication here for things becoming a little bit more peaceful, in the sense that when Uranus makes its ingress into Gemini, the planet Venus will be in conjunction with it. I mean, things have been pretty, I don't know, things have been pretty hectic recently, so maybe it's only natural to expect things to cool down a little bit. However, there could also, often when planets change signs, there can be dramatic events that happen. Because when Uranus went into Aries back in 2011, that's around the time when we had the Arab Spring and the Fukushima and the earthquake in Japan. So there could be, I mean, there could also be new dramatic things happening. With Gemini, it's tempting to think about AI and technology. But with Venus there, I just feel like the presence of Venus marking this ingress is going to smooth it over. So there may be some new stuff happening, but I'm I'm I feel more optimistic about this ingress, and I feel that once this Mars Uranus square separates, once we have Mars, and then once we have Mars in Virgo and Uranus in Gemini, it might get easier, or at the very least, it won't be hitting Donald Trump's chart quite in the same way, and we can expect a bit less drama from that guy, right? As far as what's going to happen with California and all that stuff, I'm just gonna wait and see like the rest of you, I guess. Okay, I think that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching.